Well, good morning. Welcome to worship this morning. My name is Adam Hildebrandt, and I get to be one of the pastors here at LVfirst. It is such a great day to be in worship together. Thank you so much for your presence here. Like McCade said, we are better when we're together, whether you're joining us here in person or you're joining us online. We're excited to have this time together. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been asking this question, what if? And we've been looking at the story of Jesus after Easter, the story that reminds us that Jesus is resurrected, that Jesus is on the loose in our world, and he's doing amazing, incredible things, and we get to be a part of it. And if we begin to see the resurrection reality around us, this question of what if Easter really invades our lives? What if Easter really has something to say to all of us everywhere, every moment? What if we begin to see Jesus at work in our lives, in our church, and in our community? What if is such an incredibly powerful question because, like we said on Easter, the resurrection changes everything for everyone forever. If that's the reality we long to live in, then this question of what if becomes very, very important for us. And if you're new here this morning, we're so excited you're here because you're going to hear a little bit of the secret sauce of what we do here at LVfirst and some of the things that we're really, really passionate about. And if you've heard me say them before, good. You get to hear me say them again. This is so important for us because the resurrection reality really does live its way out in our church and into our community through some really specific things, through some ways of thinking about the world and asking, what if? The story today that we're going to look at is a story of the resurrected Jesus appearing again to his disciples. And it's maybe my favorite kind of story because it's a fishing story. And I love to fish. Like, I love to fish, and I also love fishing stories. I grew up with my dad telling us all sorts of fishing stories. Like, he would just tell us these wild tales of life in like, South Florida when he was growing up. And, back in my day. And that's how most of the stories began. Back in my day, we'd take the boat out, and fish would just jump into the boat. Like, these were so ridiculous, all these stories, they became a subcategory. We would call them Florida stories. Like, now, if you're here, you would call them, like, Florida man stories. Like, he was the atypical Florida man, jean shorts and everything. Like, he was that guy. And so he would tell us all these stories about fishing. But because of him, I have an incredible love of fishing. I love to go fishing. I love any time I can be out on the water, whether it's in a river trout fishing, whether it's in a pond bass fishing, whether it's in the ocean saltwater fishing. I love to go fishing. These days, the thing that I love more than fishing by myself is taking other people fishing. I love to take other people fishing. I love to introduce them to fishing, or I love to help them to fish a little bit better. Like, I love to help people catch their first fish or to catch bigger fish. Like, it's my favorite thing in the world when somebody I'm with catches a fish because their whole world changes. You watch their face light up. You watch them connect with something so incredible. One of the people I love to take fishing is my father-in-law. I love to take my father-in-law fishing because he's not great at fishing. He's here, so I can say that, right? He will be honest and tell you that before I married into the family, he didn't catch a whole lot of fish. But now he catches a few more fish. And so a couple of years ago, we were out in the pond that's kind of in the pasture behind our house, and we're all fishing out there, and he hooks into a good-sized bass, and the drag's going out, and I'm trying to, like, dad him. Like, it's weird when you're dadding your father-in-law. You're like, tighten your drag, reel here, do this, do that. I'm trying to give him instructions. And so the fish keeps pulling drag, so he just holds his hand on the line and starts walking back up the field. He's just walking back up the field, and I was like, okay, that's another way to do it. Yeah. And so we caught the fish, and we had to take a picture with the fish because he said it was the biggest fish he'd ever caught. He sent it to all of his friends. He was excited. I was excited. It was delicious. Like, it was a win-win-win, like, all the way around. It was a lot of fun, but it was not the way that I would have written up him reeling that fish in. You know, like you want to get the good picture of the rod bent over and the fish coming up out of the water, but that's not what we got. We got Bruce running backwards through the field. It's okay, we got the fish in. It's just different than the way I thought it would have gone. And there's nothing bad about fishing in a different way. In fact, today's story invites us to think about fishing in a different way. The story comes from John chapter 21. I want you to hear a little bit of the story. It says this, starting in verse 1. It said, after these things, that's Jesus showing up to the disciples and then to the disciples with Thomas. It's the story that we talked about last week. And you remember at the end of the first appearance of Jesus, Jesus says to all of the disciples gathered there, so the way that the Father sent me, now I am sending you. And he didn't mean I'm sending you to the lake. Like, that's not what he meant. Like, he didn't say, I'm sending you on an all-expense fishing vacation. He meant to go out into the world and to love and serve and share good news. But after these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he showed himself in this way, it says. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples. Like, everybody else gets a name except for these two guys. Like, they don't feel real important to the story. But anyway, Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. And they said to him, we will go with you. And they went out and got into the boat, and that night they caught nothing. Let's just kind of get the context here. Like I said, last week we read this story and we heard about Jesus who was sending the disciples out and showing up in a unique way. The resurrected Jesus on Easter sends the disciples to share the good news of Easter, and they don't go anywhere except to the lake to go fishing. They don't do what Jesus had asked them to do. And I think the reason that they don't do what Jesus had asked them to do is that they weren't exactly sure what that looked like. Like, they had been sent, but they weren't exactly sure what that meant to be sent. They weren't exactly sure what to do next. And much like the disciples, most of us, when we're not sure what to do next, do you know what we do? We do what we did last. Like, we default back to old patterns if we're not sure what it is about what it is that we're supposed to do next. When I'm not sure what to do next, I do what I did last. And that's exactly what Peter did. Peter was like, okay, I was fishing and Jesus called me and I followed him. And now Jesus has sent me, so I guess I'll go fishing because I'm not sure what to do otherwise. We default back to the things that we're familiar with, the things that we're used to, the ways that we do things, the ways that we've done things for years and years and years. And I think we do this in a lot of places in our lives. There are a lot of things that we would love to do differently. There are a lot of things that we would love to have look differently, whether it's relationships or what we do or things that we struggle with. We would love for them to look differently, but we tend to deal with them. We tend to try to change them by doing the thing that we've always done, and we end up getting the same result, which is what the disciples got when they went out fishing and did the same thing that they've always done. You get nothing out of it. You just end up with a long night in an empty boat. And there is nothing worse than a long night in an empty boat. So many of us live our lives that way, trying the same thing over and over and over to experience some sort of change. And we default back to what it is that we've always done. We default back to old patterns. We default back to something that we're familiar with, to what we did last. I mean, it's safe. I know how to do that. I don't know how to do this. And for some of us, it's not even doing this. It's that I know what I'm supposed to do, but I'd rather not go do it because it's more difficult, and so I'll distract myself with something else. You know, even I was thinking about this week as I was writing this sermon. It's ridiculous to me how many times I'm like writing, and all of a sudden I'm like, I'm not sure how to say this, or I'm not sure what I should say here. So instead of trying to figure that out, I'll get on Facebook, right? And I'll just distract myself for a few minutes. As opposed to doing the hard work of trying to craft something, to figure something out, to go, okay, God, what are we doing here? How are we going to do this? Like, I'm just going to distract myself. And what's fascinating to me about distractions is that distractions are the one thing that make us forget about our woes, but they're also the source of most of our woes. Those things that distract us and keep us from doing what it is that we're supposed to be doing create more consternation, keep us from doing what it is that we should be doing. Because what I did before and what I'm doing in distracting myself might not be the thing that I'm supposed to do. These disciples have experienced just that. The fruitlessness of doing the thing that they weren't supposed to be doing. Luckily, the story goes on. Because if you want something to be different, you can't do the same thing. Just after daybreak, it says, which should kind of focus our attention around Easter again. This is still an Easter story. This is a resurrected Jesus story. And just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" Which, let me kind of translate that into fishing talk. Y'all catching anything? Right, that's what we say to each other when we're out fishing. And here's the great thing about fishermen, is fishermen will lie. Right? They all lie. They don't lie just about how big a fish is. They lie about whether they're catching anything or not, because they don't want to tell anybody else where their secret spot is, and they don't want anybody to know, like, hey, yeah, I'm catching fish over here, because they don't want a bunch of people fishing in the spot that they're fishing. But these guys hadn't caught anything. So Jesus goes, "Y'all catch anything?" And it's even worse when somebody asks you that and you haven't been catching anything. That's the worst thing in the world, especially if you had made your career for most of your adult life as a fisherman. Right? So you got to imagine Peter and these guys who had done this for their whole lives. Like, this is what they're used to. This is what they do. And Jesus is like, "Y'all catch anything?" No. I know it says, no, right there, and we think, oh, no. But, I imagine they hung their heads a little bit. No, we've been doing the same thing that we've always done in the way that we've always done it. And you know what we got? We got nothing. We got nothing. So Jesus says to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some." Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some. The way this reads in Greek is actually this: throw, and you will find. Which sounds like a Jesus parable, Seek and you will find. Now Jesus is like, no. Throw and you will find. Just throw your net on the other side of the boat. Again, these are guys who have fished their whole lives. They know that running up the bank holding your line is not the way that you get a fish in. They know that casting the net on the other side of the boat is not going to make any difference. And it's actually going to make things more difficult. Right? I mean, the difference between this side of the boat and this side of the boat is not enough to make a huge difference. And even worse, in this culture, they would fish on the left side of the boat because the right arm was the strong arm, and that's how they would pull their nets in, is they would use their right arm and they would pull their nets in. They would work together to do that. So if you cast your net on the other side of the boat, now you have to pull the nets in with your left arm, which is not your stronger arm. It's not the arm that you're used to doing this with. And so they would have to rely on each other in order to make this happen. If they were going to cast the net on the other side of the boat, they had to trust that the other people were going to do what they had to do. They were going to have to work together in order to get those nets back in. And they were going to have to use their weaker arm. They were going to have to trust each other. And they were going to have to trust that this stranger on the shore that they don't even know has some insight that they didn't even realize. And as we're working together, as we're doing what God is calling us to do, we have to trust each other, and we have to trust that God is in it. That God has invited us to do something differently. I mean, I just can't imagine like somebody walking up on the shore or the bank while I'm fishing and being like, hey, do it completely different from the way that you've ever always done it before. And me being like, yeah, that sounds like a great plan. I'll just do that. But that's exactly what they did. Jesus calls them to put their nets on the other side of the boat, and it stretches the disciples to do something that they had never done before. And Jesus invites all of us to do some things that stretch us in ways that we've never done before. And as a church, as a gathered group of people, he invites us to cast our nets on the other side of the boat, to do things in a different way than we've done them before in order to see God at work. Because if I do things the way that I've always done them before, do you know who I trust? Me. I trust me and my methods. I trust the way that I've always done it before. I don't trust God, and I don't trust the people around me. I trust me. But God is inviting us to do something different. The resurrected Jesus is saying there's a new way of living. There is a new way of engaging the world. There's a new way of engaging each other. It is a new day, and there are new possibilities if you'll just do things a little differently than the way that you've done them before. I don't know if you know, like we just did a Monday, Thursday service that included some of the 7 last words of Jesus. Do you know what the 7 last words of a church are? We've never done it that way before. And so we've got to get out of this mindset of we've never done it that way before and be willing to cast the net on the other side of the boat, because here, this is so important. There's this study that came out recently called The Great Dechurching, and they found that 40 million Americans have left the church over the last 25 years. 40 million Americans, like the church, like not just, like not this church or, like the church, like all of the churches. Churches of every kind. Non-denominational churches, denominational churches, like contemporary churches, traditional churches, all the churches. 40 million Americans who used to go to church don't go to church anymore. And there are lots of reasons to look at, and there are lots of reasons to talk about, and we could talk about all of them. But one of the main reasons was because there's a disconnect between what the church talks about and what the church does. The church talks about loving people and serving people. The church in reality oftentimes does not do that. And so it's incredibly important for us to be willing to shift our mindset from the way that we've always done it to the way that Jesus is calling us to do it. It might not look like the way we've done it before, and that's not bad. That's not bad. In 2020, we couldn't come to church like we're here together today. We had talked about this passage, and we talked about it from the comfort of our own homes. Not because we wanted to be there, but because we had to be there. And we began to use this language here as a church about connecting the church to the community and the community to the church. But we talked first about connecting the church to the community, because traditionally what churches have done is they've set up all these programs and they've said, hey, we're going to open the doors and everybody come to us. And in 2020, the whole world shut down and people couldn't come to us, so we decided we needed to rethink the way that we did things. And so we cast the net on the other side of the boat, and we said, fine, we'll take the church into the community. And so if you're wondering where that language came from, it came from this passage. Like, we were used to fishing on this side of the boat, now we're going to fish on this side of the boat. We're going to do things differently. We're going to be focused on taking this church into the community. And you guys have been amazing about that. been incredible to see what God has done through that work. It's been incredible to see over these last 4 years the way that God has taken this group of people and sent us out in so many different ways. And the ways that we've been willing to cast the net on the other side of the boat in all sorts of places and all sorts of ways. And here's how I know that this is an effective way of fishing for us. Is because I talk to people all the time, and once they get me to admit that I'm a pastor, because I don't like saying that out loud because the conversation gets weird and, just whatever. Anyway, once I say, I'm a pastor over at Lawrenceville First, right down the road or right up the street or right there in downtown Lawrenceville, and they say, you're that church that... which is the best thing we can ever hear. You're that church that brings food into our neighborhood in the summer. You're that church that shows up and serves at the concession stand at the football games. You're that church that does all sorts of things. You're that church that shows up with drinks and candy, and you're that church that does face painting at the prelude to the 4th. You're that church that does that Easter festival at the elementary school. You're that church that. To the point that, I kid you not, I didn't love this sermon until this morning. When I was at the drive-thru in McDonald's, because I'm a fisherman and I do the same thing the same way every day. And so every Sunday morning I got to get a bacon, egg, and cheese biscuit and a large Coke. And so I'm at the drive-thru line at the McDonald's, and the kid throws the window open. He looks at me, and he goes, "Is your name Adam?" I said, "Yes." And he goes, You're the pastor of that church that always comes over to our school, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah. Tell me your name." And had this whole great conversation with this kid in the drive-thru line at McDonald's. Because we didn't get stuck in, we've always done it. We've never done it that way before. Because we didn't get stuck casting the net only on one side of the boat, where we weren't catching any fish. We decided to turn around and cast it on the other side of the boat. And it involves all of us trusting each other, and it involves all of us trusting God, and it involves all of us being engaged in unique ways and getting outside of what's comfortable for us. It might involve all of us signing up for LAP next weekend, being a part of the Lawrenceville Assistance Project. Like whether it's on Saturday serving in some way, or whether it's on Sunday writing cards to over 1,000 teachers in our cluster schools. Just to say thank you for the work that you do. However it is, however you can serve, if you've got your phone out the rest of service, I'm going to assume that you're signing up for LAP, not that you're checking master's scores. They don't go off till 12. I'm not going to be offended if you're signing up for LAP. Do that. Sign up. Be a part. Be a part of LAP. Be a part of what's happening. That's what casting our net on the other side of the boat means. It means taking something that was traditionally just students, and it was done in this way, in this shape, in this form, and inviting the whole church to be a part of it so that we can engage more people, so we can cast the net on the other side of the boat. And yeah, I might not be used to doing that. I might not be used to pulling with my left hand. I might not be used to cutting somebody else's yard. I might not be used to fixing a gutter on somebody else's house. I might not be used to writing a thank you note to somebody that I don't even know. But it's amazing what God can do when we live into the kingdom reality that says Jesus is resurrecting everything around us. And we get to be a part of it. That by mowing lawns and fixing gutters and sending cards, planting gardens and cleaning up trails, our community is experiencing Easter, resurrection. that the kingdom of God is being made known. And if you're paying attention, if you know the story, what happens next is amazing. They got so many fish that they can't bring it in. They can't even pull the net in. There's so many fish. John realizes that it's Jesus on the shore giving them fishing advice. Peter jumps in the water, swims to Jesus. They drag the net ashore, which it was nice of Peter to get out of the work. It's the second time that, Peter has gone fishing with Jesus and not caught anything before and then caught something after Jesus was there. He does that in Luke chapter 5. They pull the net ashore and somebody decides they got to count the fish. So they find that they've got 153 large fish, which is a strange number for a fisherman to give, right? If I caught 153 fish, do you know how many fish I would tell you I caught? Yeah, at least 200, right? There's at least 200 fish in that net. He was this big. This big. But they count 153 fish, and scholars have always talked about why is it 153 fish, and many of them think because that's the number of nations that there were in the world at that time. In other words, they looked at all these fish, and they started counting, and they said, 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish. They had all the fish from all over the world, from different perspectives and different points of view. They said, look, we got a blue fish, and the blue fish is in the net with the red fish. And here's the most interesting part. It says that the net wasn't torn. The Greek word there is skizeo. It's where we get our English word schism, or breaking apart. Because when we do what Jesus tells us to do, when we think about the world in different ways, you can bring lots of different people together, and somehow God does something amazing in all of that. Because God's love is made known all the more in our willingness to cast the net on the other side of the boat. Because the things that hold us together are things that bring us together. And what brings us together is loving and serving others. Again, if you know the rest of the story, they have a meal there with Jesus, and the camera kind of zooms in on Jesus and Peter, and they have this conversation of reconciliation. And Jesus looks at Peter and goes, Peter, do you love me more than these? And we're not sure who the these were. Like is he talking about like your fishing buddies? Do you love me more than your fishing buddies, Peter? Do you love me more than fishing with these guys? Do you love me more than doing this? Peter says, yes, Lord, you know I love you. And Jesus says, great. Feed my lambs. Do something for somebody else, not just for you. He goes on to ask him 2 more times. And this process of reconciliation, this conversation about how Peter loves Jesus, always comes back to Jesus pointing to Peter loving others. It's casting the net on the other side of the boat. It's doing things differently. It's being willing to connect our church to the community, to go out into our city, our neighborhood, our schools, our parks, our apartment complexes, and to be a part of resurrection right here in this place.